probably 3 or 4 miles.
Exactly. I know. And I see, like, my water is,
Yeah, I get
I'm thinking of shading that light. No, you need to get it in context. Wait a minute. The content. I could not want that.
yeah, and it's gonna be in the minutes.
So now we've got it. And we have like, oh, probably 15. Separate.
Okay, well, after I finished removing all my body hair.
So we made it to the record after all.
Yeah, right, so it does make, no, I haven't started the meeting yet. Now, you had to understand the context. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Warren Planning Board, Monday, November 22nd. We do have a quorum and.
I would just ask if you do a roll call because we can't pick up Mr. Beers.
Oh, okay, yeah. If we can just note that you are here and say your
Yeah,
name.
Mr. Allen is here, Mr. Medeiros is here, Mr. Giles is here, Mr. White is here, Mr. Dixon is here, Mr. Massey is here, Mr. Patterson is here.
Faster. Okay, there is no action needed for the waterfront overlay district development plan review according to zoning ordinance Article 26. There are no public hearings, and so I will call the meeting to order. Do I have to have a motion for that? Good. The first order of business is approval of minutes. The first minutes were from 9/27/21. And I believe those were the ones that Andrea, you had made the adjustments to, or Robin?
Yeah.
Oh, no problem. But more important,
It's the reverse, I think, yeah. No, that was just the question about whether or not we were definitely going to be receiving the draft decisions. Possibly.
yeah, decisions that are made by the planning board would be posted. That was,
Yeah, I circulated them. So people have comments.
right. The concept being that in the past, those decisions would be made here and we wouldn't necessarily get a chance to see them. Because there can be a slip between the cup and the lip in terms of decisions, what we think we've said here and then what actually becomes the decision.
So for the bonus round, did anyone notice the regularities with the decision? 10 points. They were labeled for the zoning board. They got them right.
Right, and Robin, yeah,
Robin corrected.
I had corrected those, so.
10 points.
Now, I don't know what those can be cashed in
They can't
for,
really be
but,
anything. You can go to the arcades and stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so with those corrections to the minutes, could I have a vote, or are there any other comments or concerns? Right, I saw your, yeah, I would say we will, not may, will circulate. And then the other, the minor changes, just to the, Jim was noted as vice chairman throughout, it was just that one. And, but more importantly, planning board involved with the zoning board of review. So any other changes? If hearing none, could I have a motion to approve those minutes? Jim Patterson voting, making the motion, a second?
The 9/27.
Yes.
Yeah, for the 9/27, a second. Andrea? Second, all in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Next is the meeting minutes from 10/25, which was our most recent meeting. It's a little bit more complicated, and the information was sent out regarding our decision on the applicant's request for,
The Drysdale first. Minor subdivision.
were there any questions or comments on those?
Are we talking?
No.
The only thing I'll note is that.
You have a law firm of the attorney that was represented.
I just have a comment about the document. If I could make a suggestion to add page numbers in the footer, I think that would help. Oh, they're on the top left. Yeah, in the decision, I don't see them there. Yeah, it makes it easier, especially when you have more than one and we're doing something.
That wouldn't go into the minutes, though. Would that go into administrative matters?
I mean, it's.
Yeah, I just want to make sure it gets done.
We're talking about the decision,
Yeah, the decision. Well, we're actually talking about the minutes from which included that decision.
oh, I see. Sorry about that.
We can do that as a form.
Yeah. Anything else on the minutes? All right, could I have a motion to accept the minutes as
I
Jim?
believe Mr. Patterson can read names here.
I'm sorry.
You were here at the last meeting, so.
Okay.
Correct.
Someone who was here?
I make a motion,
All right,
motion to approve the minutes.
and a second? Ashley? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay. So Bob had sent out a few words of this historic and cultural resources draft #1. Is our ghostwriter going to be here today, or?
Yeah, no, we'll
Okay.
take her comments. So just before you get into this,
Oh.
so every element of comprehensive plan, coming for the plan, comprehensive plan, planning board. I have circulated this to the commentary for our district commission. So we can talk about it at their next meeting. We'll have a chance to have your comments. And I will get it out. Hard to see moving forward. There's one development this month coming to you. Our goal is to have this done by July. So it is important that you do read them and have comments. Because we don't want to July.
Great. I've got a couple of comments about it, specific and generally. What are the overall, one of the things that I talked about is who's responsible for initiating and seeing these things through. In the past comprehensive plans, there was an action step, so at the end of this rascal, there's information about how we're going to reach those goals. But what isn't included is who specifically is going to do that. Now, my sense is that who specifically is going to do that is the gentleman at the end of the dais here. That said, though, I think in some cases, there's probably a town manager action necessary, town council
And planning board.
and planning board. Previously, in some of the past comprehensive plans, there have been actions assigned to groups like the Voluntary Historic District Commission, folks that don't have essentially the legal clout to bring about that action. They can be assisting in that process, but they would not be the initiators, the instigators, the folks who accomplish it. So that would be something that we want to add in future pieces. Yeah.
On page 8, it starts getting implementation. It says, formatted as a table. So I wonder if that your suggestion. Once this is a table.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, and then you go over the table, it says actually you're responsible, something like that, and this serves as that template. Because then I make a discussion of who's got this one, these downloaders.
Right. And that's how the table has worked in the past, but we are looking at a different thing. So, yeah. No, but that's exactly, how it should it be. And that's, that's essentially where I think it would appear.
Yeah, and again, as I said, the last week, this is different than what every other community's comp plans look like. This is a core study plan. All these elements relate back to that. How do you preserve historic preservation, cultural resources, concentrate your development? Keep in mind that the implementation is even been present. That is back to try to see what we're doing and back.
That's kind of getting codified in that state.
Yeah, it would be.
So that was, kind of a larger element within this. Now, within the piece itself, there are some points. I mean, these can be prose descriptions. So starting, I don't want to read this whole thing, I don't like being read to anymore. But looking at it, let's take it broadly in terms of goals, concerns, questions relative to that.
I think the point that you had raised here is, I think Marcus Medicom initially highlighted. It's
Yeah, I mean, to me, there's one thing I would like to say. Market to Medicom project is consistent with the town's goals of historic preservation in that it has little or no negative or adverse impact on notable historic structures, because it does have an impact. It's not that it has no impact, it's that it has no negative or adverse impact. And then the SOAMs piece, to me, felt artificially inserted. I think it's important to acknowledge the indigenous people who were here initially, or at least at the time of colonization. God knows who was there before them. But this information in here seems out of step with the development of historic and cultural resources. And
Isn't it just an acknowledgement of who was here and the cultural framework was?
well, it says, it indicates that the Poconokeets are still stewards of the land. Oh yeah, this is the welcome to SOAMs, the part of the statement. We pay tribute to the tribal elders and people of this community who served and continue to serve as stewards of the lands and waterways of Rhode Island, Massachusetts. I don't know what that means. In light of the fact that, I worked for Save the Bay for 20 years and, I've been on the planning board here for a number of years and I just don't, to me, that's it's a statement that is without support, that particular state, that particular element. I think everything else makes sense to me, but I think taking this, it would probably make more sense to have as an appendix if you want to put it in. But to go from, here we are talking to market to Metacom to a large
Yeah,
section.
I think you're right, maybe the placement should be different than we're right now in the draft. But I do think the information needs to be.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that however, if we're going into this level, it does open it up. I mean, how about the Warren Land Trust? They've done a great deal in terms of being stewards of the land.
Or appropriate places within business section for local participation partners.
Right.
And that tie into.
Yeah, I don't want it to
No, I
break up the flow. I mean, and if you don't agree, I'm happy to. Andrea, did you have anything there?
I'm gonna wait till a bit later.
Okay. Protection of landscapes and archaeological resources. Under Burrs Hill, I thought that it says the town should give special attention to known. Don't we already do that? Like, as opposed to should give,
Continue.
well, the town gives special attention to known and potential archaeological sites. I mean, I don't.
Well, I'm not sure if there's a listing of where all the sites are, so that it's almost like when you're doing excavation and you get a big safe,
Yeah,
there might be a reference to that kind of a notification, not notification, but that kind of a identification of a spot relative to burial ground or some other kind of.
yeah, I guess I'm wondering, like, I like declarative. Yeah, I know they are. And that's why I like declarative statements though, rather, because if you say should gives, to me, that's like,
We'll continue to give.
I think it's the should. It needs to be big that, that way the language.
Yeah, we could be.
yeah, I mean, because I think that would acknowledge the fact that the town is sensitive to this, not that language suggests that the town is not sensitive to it, they clearly aren't. The Kickapoo River crossing in Windmill Hill District. This important historic area has no protection or programs for preservation. Is that correct?
Well,
21.
reservoir overlay district is some protection, which was essentially the basis for the denial of consent.
Right. And aren't we moving though in toward protecting that area? Isn't the town moving toward protecting that area?
There's some controversy associated with the dams that impacted the, you have portion of solar array.
I'd prefer to see it, because I mean, if you say this historic area this important historic area has no protection or programs for preservation, that suggests that we're ignoring it. And
Right. And as I
is
said,
there a better way of framing that?
well, I think there needs to be a reference that it is an overlay district.
Okay.
That does protect it.
Then the Tuisset Neck Historic District, large farms, largest farm still in its operation is Manchester Farm, it's known as. It says, it actually, the development rights to Manchester's farm and Keys Farm were purchased.
Keys Farm was, I'm not serving in Manchester.
No, they were, for sure, because I worked with Dave Frericks on that. So both Manchester and Key Farm development rights were purchased through the cooperation of the Rhode Island Farm Bureau was involved. Yeah, agriculture. So I mean, development pressures and lack of protective measures threaten the district's preservation. I think it's important to note that those development rights were purchased through actions on behalf of the town for both. And Key Farm is a big part of that area. The other thing is,
Absolutely delighted.
I'm sorry, what?
Just an absolute delight.
Oh, absolutely. Well, you know, that actually the Key Farm was through Mrs. Key and her other son who since passed away. That they're both significant protections of that area. So the Warren Preservation Society has also put up a number of historic plaques there at some of the houses that might be noted. Which doesn't mean that this area can't be protected, because as we know, the Black Horse Farm, Solar Farm is there. There's
Just to make sure that not the rest of it.
interesting, there's a summer home down in the wetland there. Yeah, pretty much. Okay, anything so far on that? I don't have a lot here, by the way. I'm not going to go through this thing.
You know, those protections that you just mentioned, that acquisition, it would be worthwhile to put the dates in.
Yeah, I think so. Bob, would that be okay to put in the dates of those development rights purchased? Yeah, because that way you've got a record of it. Because it gets forgotten. I mean, it's.
Just commenting what you just said, I just, and then I noticed down at the source languages, just regulation. So is that something maybe necessary? That section.
Anytime there is development, there are existing historic rules. Typically, there needs to be kind of that they should.
To preserve, I mean, that's part of the comprehensive plan, the character of town.
You know, sorry,
No, go ahead.
reading this cold, when I read additional regulations. I don't know, maybe they should be, maybe they shouldn't be. And so, the same language. That same language should be up there. Here you say it's. That it's actually saying that on a case by case basis, sometimes.
I guess my first reaction is we shouldn't be reading. We need to, just editorial, we need to read these things, get to these meetings.
No, he was saying that,
I read it before.
yeah,
What I'm saying is when I read that is educated, like, I don't, I haven't, I've never been in a meeting where I've taken this, like, service. I'm sure it's, what I'm saying is, I read the document in my homework, saying that, do you understand what I'm saying?
yeah, regulations should focus, provisions could require, the subdivision regulations could encourage. They're all, soft comments. Do we want to harden those?
Well, I would just add in there that, not just the town, but the state historic preservation center.
Yeah, so that it's clear. I mean, I think not knowing, because that's who's going to be looking at it, not somebody on the planning board, but, ultimately anybody, any citizen. So yeah, a little bit more clarity. National Register of Historic Places. There was, we didn't hear about the historic district not being, where was that in this? That's the next zoning programs and strategies. Anything before, and then the National Register of Historic Places to me is like, that's the National Register. There's not much we can do with that.
Started at the last council meeting. That we have historic district. So by the decision, by that board, they can take it to the appeals board. Voluntary certificate. The conflict with state law is taking the board review.
Would that be us acting as the zoning board of review?
No,
or-
the zoning board of review
Okay.
would be. What happened at the last council meeting is that that's voluntary. It's your choice. You make exterior renovations other than painting your house, you are potentially acknowledging the tax rate. If you are in the area that's designated as the historic district, it's not voluntary. Any exterior alteration that you make requires an income for a certificate of appropriateness. That mission, whether your house is built in 1850 or 1950. I think part of what we want to do with the comprehensive plan is clean that up.
Yeah.
Voluntary needs to go away. And I'm not convinced that there is consensus on the council that having a designated historic district, even though it exists now, and calling it that, there's support for that. There's all kinds of information and studies that having a dedicated historic district brings value to that area. You just have to go to, or even you look at Bristol. I don't think that punishes people that are there now. And one of the things that I think people are getting hung up on, if somebody economically cannot afford, they need to replace the siding of their house, they cannot afford to make it look like it was built in 1880. There's a remedy. That's why they have to make it work. They can make an analysis and say, so you see, collaborative, target board, other aesthetic product that look forward. So think it's that comfort that people are being penalized for having a house in a historic district. Not unlike buying a house in a floodplain. You probably should do some due diligence as to what
Right.
you're buying into. But that needs to be cleaned up a little bit. You know, again, I think, I'm not sure where it comes with respect to the value of that, but I think we should at least try to do that through this document.
Well, voluntary, I gotta, you know, that term being in there, and because I was aware of the 2013 and voluntary, I think was left in there to make people feel more warm and fuzzy about the thing.
Most don't feel that.
No, I know they don't. Yeah, I don't, I know where you're going, but you know, it's important. I don't know what language you're using here to make that clear.
It's called a historic district.
Yeah,
Right.
I gotta tell you, I don't know why it's called is it, could I move in and just opt out of that?
No.
No, it's not voluntary.
Right,
It's ridiculous.
right,
The only, as I said, voluntary is when you want a tax credit.
right. So this should be called the Warren Historic District
Right,
and the Warren Historic District Committee,
right.
you know, because I mean, all you're doing is creating confusion for the people who think, wait a minute, you know, this is my choice.
It's like the
And
parking garage.
It's making for a combative review,
Yeah.
you know, when you go in there,
Yes.
you know.
Oh, yeah, we've seen it a number of times here, you know, people have come in and,
But I mean, I will say that since we have not had an appeal. So there have not been appeals from decisions of the historic district in the last 3 years. They don't always agree with my position, but my position is let's make a compromise. Not everyone can afford to do what we want. And to the extent we haven't had an appeal, I think it's working. Voluntary piece has to go away. Just
Yeah.
meaning.
I agree with that. It's misleading. It's like the parking garage that I park in Providence. The name of the parking garage is Freeway Public Parking. But you have to pay to park there.
Because it's on Freeway Street.
I have no idea. It's not even close to a freeway. It's ridiculous. Every time I see the sign, I want to knock it down. Anyway.
So if it's gone, we know who did it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Is that on the record?
I'll turn YouTube off.
So let's get rid of the ball.
Yeah, no, I think that's important. And I think it's important to note the value of a historic district, not only, you know, to the town's character. This is one of those areas where it's never spelled out that is of value. It's like environmental protection, you know? So what's the value? The value of it is ripples throughout the region. The value of the historic district ripples throughout the town.
Yeah, I think people come here because they like to walk through these neighborhoods. They see-
Yes.
And the value of the home. I mean, it's like a hell of a lot more expensive.
But it does sound like you have an option. If I were to buy a house and read this, it says, program to encourage voluntary preservation, restoration, and protection. Sounds like you have a feeling.
And the other part
To
that
encourage.
needs to be cleaned up is that actually extends to any home anywhere in town.
Really? Then what, but why do we have this map then that details?
The map is depicting the historic district. You get into the ordinance itself, that's where it speaks to. Here. And that's something we need to clean up too. We're gonna get to that in other parts of the conference. Zoning ordinance needs.
Wow, okay, because, you know, my house is over 100 years old. Nobody's
It's on the lot.
over my dead body. No, you know, that's interesting. It feels like, you know, not that it's not a good idea, not that I wouldn't want to support it, but, you know, if I were somebody who was appealing this, I'd say, if this is what's going on, it's not being enforced.
Well, it's voluntary.
Yeah.
Sorry.
This itself brings a lot of money to the town. It does people see a lot of things like this, they travel to see it, they wanna walk around, and then they go to different restaurants, and then they go shopping, and they wanna be a part of this, but they're not gonna venture off to find, unless it's really significant property.
I mean, like,
You
just
know.
look at Manchester Farm, it's that farm house 100 years old. They wanted to knock that down.
Well, we've let so many structures that I can think of just rot away. Di Maple Road had a barn that was over 100 years old. The only
I
way
think
that,
the way the ordinance is.
yeah, I mean, that's problematic to me because, you know,
So that's something we should address in this, and be more specific in terms of, you know, what.
we should probably take a look at that ordinance. Can you send that out? Because that's,
Through the demolition ordinance.
I mean, you
Who
can,
would enforce it?
well, it's a lot of work. I mean, you know,
Well, it'd be enforced because it's under the demolition ordinance, so in order to get a demolition permit, they have to go to the.
but he's not necessarily, I mean, you know, there was a house right next door to me that was over 100 years old. It was allowed to rot away to the point that it was collapsing.
I will add that people.
But I mean, you know, that's tough because you could have, there are houses outside the historic district that are, I mean, we're talking about 1920. A lot of houses built in 1920.
Did you opt in instead of like having to be forced to browse it?
So again, it falls within the demolition permit, which is, you know, again, this is one of the things we have to clear up the historic district ordinance. And then, because the building was gonna be demolished within the historic district, wait for the town to draft a demolition ordinance or some of this language in it. So we need to clean that up, but I think if nothing else, making a statement in the comp plan that needs to be cleaned up, be consistent and easy for people to understand that, you know, it's a shared point. We think that 1920 architecture was significant, that the 50-year-old house.
At this point, it's like, on the score, so like the one that's browsing, that's.
No, I mean, and
Right,
that's.
because they're like identified properties, so I'm looking at like, I know in Pittsburgh, if there's not a district, so if you have something that you wanna opt into your historic registry, that then goes into these, you can, outside, so there's the district, it brings the economic value of things, but then anything outside, you could identify or the owner himself identify as being.
Yeah, I mean, the 100-year thing becomes arbitrary. You know, at some point, are we gonna say we want to preserve Limit Town? No.
Such a lovely place.
Well, and also you age it, right? I mean, instead you could say houses built during a particular time frame, right? I mean, you know, Fred's point is well taken. A lot of the houses built between 1920 and 1950 really aren't very interesting.
And they're still standing
Right.
all over the place.
So,
But I like your idea, Ashley, if they opt in,
Yeah.
you know, outside of that specific historic district, which contains a preponderance of historically significant houses,
I mean,
that's,
I would put in some language that if a house is not 100 years, a longer time period, and then, you know, also add to that, you know, because we do have some historic farmhouses that probably
Yeah.
should be preserved. That's.
well, a Warren Preservation Society could be helpful in that, you know, identifying some of these places and encouraging people to, yeah, I mean,
Yeah, we could work on it.
okay, great. Yeah, no, that's significant. I mean, that,
So just so I understand, is the scope of what we as planning to modify actually tasked, we're not actually tasked with looking at it.
But it's to an extent, yes.
Yeah, I mean, but we've got Allison working for us, so ideally she would come back.
Yeah, this document is coming from the planning board to the town.
On a topic like this, there's another, like,
The historic
there's
district,
a bunch of stuff that needs to be presented at the same time.
Well, actually, I'd like to see the ordinance, because I mean, it's like, it's been kind of amorphous and frankly, like, you know, I felt like it was being handled. So I think it would behoove us to understand the ordinance as it is now. So when we see a rewrite based on, you know, what Bill, Bob and Allison.
yeah, no, I think there needs to be some context to it, is that, you know, how this happened. We have updated this 18 years, you know, it's time to correct some.
Right.
Worse than we have, but to your point, Matt, the comprehensive plan moves from the planning board to the town council for their, that goes to the state. So all these other constituencies weigh in, but ultimately the document that goes to the town council.
But there will be a time when people in the historic district now will come in and have a chance to say something. So better to make it clear what is, you know,
It's a night, everyone, who want to be medicated.
Right, so with the redevelopment of Pentakom and the, tip we're looking at, have some money sometimes.
Potentially, yes. I mean, and again, that's the purpose of making it a corridor plan is concentrating development there, preserving the services. But potentially you're creating financial resources there that could be, whether it's housing or historic preservation. Yeah, you could, as long as there's a way that the town is adopting tax credit financing has to have a public purpose, which pretty fine. But I would argue that if you're calling out the significance of historic preservation in your comp plan, there's no purpose.
I don't know, I know like Little Compton does a percentage of each sale. Have we ever considered
I
that?
think that requires state of aid.
Little Compton, every sale, so would that not,
It could be,
I mean, to me, that was like every sale of a house in Little Compton, a certain percentage of that sale price goes to a fund that is used to preserve, I think in their case, open space.
yeah, I mean, again, it's.
But it could
state-
just as easily go toward a more general public fund that would be used for the protect, you know, to support people's attempts to, you know, keep their houses historically significant.
and that's-
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to put it out there anyway. I mean, you know, I don't know that, I mean,
We all have a fitting for the tough monsoons. Here,
Yeah, and I'm a little worried about that one for the tip.
yeah.
yeah, the sale of a house though is, it's not,
And you're gonna, the pushback you're gonna get, so to your
Yeah, I'm
point,
not
Ashley, it's
wedded
not
to it.
hurting individual taxpayers by having a percentage, it's no different than like the hotel tax. You get a percentage of it. That's the state agreeing that the town should retain more of the conveyance tax or transfer tax that they are now. Does that open a Pandora's box for, I mean, that's, you know, I think it's good. I mean, they probably look at Little Compton and say, that's safe. I mean, doing that in an area that was more densely populated, could you or be allowed to do that? There might be more pushback there because of the values of the properties on the way. You know, but they-
But you could put it, I mean, you could put it in, but without lobbying our state reps to get a bill passed, it's not doing it.
Yeah, and it's gonna be more than just our
Right.
stereotypes. I mean, but, I mean, it could be, you can have it in there as a goal. I mean, I don't think you don't lose anything by stating that that's an objective, it doesn't necessarily.
because it gives you the, at least the standing to take action if you chose to later on. It's like the Historic District Commission. That wasn't in the way that that ordinance was written was not in the comprehensive plan that preceded this one. What was in there was the importance of the historic district, and so that gave it some momentum for the creation of it. So that'd be my argument. Again, I'm not wedded to it. It's an idea. I think it could be problematic, and, you know, if there were a hell of a lot of pushback, the TIF money is much easier, you know, because people would see it as, wait a minute, you're taking money out of my pocket for what? Open space is actually easier to get money for, because people kind of get that. But if you're saying, I'm going to give that money for somebody to put siding on their house, it's like, yeah, I don't think so. Yeah, right. Yeah, no, I hear you. Okay, so that's an area that,
And so a little,
oh, I'm sorry.
they just
Is it?
pulled up in Little Compton, it's for agricultural space. And just to be clear, that is not costing any taxpayer a nickel. I mean, that is simply taking a percentage of the money that the state gets away from the state and reinvesting that in the community. I will love, I'll debate that all day long.
Yeah, that's a whole, well,
I mean, I'm okay with that.
Well, again, I think if the usage of it is broad enough, if it's not seen as specific,
I think you can make the argument, I mean, we're one of the oldest towns in Rhode Island, we want to protect our historic downtown. Not everyone can afford to do what we want them to do, so this is an incentive to do it, whether it's open space or it's a preservation of historic asset. I mean, I think that's a completely legitimate reason to say that state you should get 5 cents on the dollar, you should get 4 cents.
right? It's like the key in the Manchester Farms, the preservation, the purchase of development rights, the town had to put in a certain amount. But it's small compared to the rest of the folks, but it's an important element. And should that land, I mean, right now, we're in a terrible time for buying, you know, open space, but things change.
This happens on me, you know, actually in her former life, I mean, I'm on the board of Discover New Board, state picks and chooses. You're gonna get this percentage of hotel and things tax, and now we're gonna pull a little bit of that back. It's not their money.
Yeah.
It's the municipality. It's paid by people that are either leaving or visiting.
So Frank, just quick,
Andrea, yeah,
before we leave the idea of the opt-in has to be a one-way trip. Like, once somebody's opt-in, they stay, right? And that property stays.
The property stays.
Stays there, right? Just make sure it's.
Back on your house. Sorry.
opt-in is forever.
Yeah, you've,
conveys with the property.
I mean, there would be something on the land
Oh, right.
records that says that they're just property.
Okay. To adjust that ordinance, what would we need to do then?
Well, I mean, any zoning ordinance needs to start here. The zoning, then have to read.
What's the plan by the state? Reality has the burning. Making amendments, zoning ordinance, plans to come.
Which is, we're gonna have a lot of that because based on the zoning ordinance. It's-
Okay.
That's, even if they don't support it, I mean, just putting it out there for people to think about it, is really positive.
Yeah, absolutely. The adaptive reuse of historic structures. Oh, no, I'm sorry. State's opportunity zone. Wasn't there an issue with the state's opportunity zone being truncated artificially?
No, so I mean, the problem, you know, we are, the 305 census tract is designated as being an opportunity zone. The problem that we have, you know, with Pittsburgh is, you know, deal with covered acres, miles, you could say that's an opportunity zone, you're gonna be development. It's for capital gains kind of program that we don't have any of those large tracts that singularly are things that I tried to raise with federal delegation and the treasury that COVID happened was, could we create an overlay district in the opportunity zone where I could take, say, 8 properties, and say I wanted to do a housing project. Value for us right now because what is there?
Well, wasn't there some issue with Parker Mill?
It's on the opposite side of the 305 system track and so where Parker Mill is not in the 305 system track. Parking lot across the street is.
Right, so that seems,
Well, I mean, that's not good. I can't blame Trump for that.
but I
I'd like
mean,
to, but I can't.
but is there anything that we can do in the comprehensive plan that would
Well, I mean,
point
again,
out?
I tried to raise this issue with Treasury that if you had contiguous properties, that if you could treat them as being in the opportunity zone. We didn't get any traction on that, so I mean, I don't know that that's a path, and then that program will go away at some point. I mean, I don't know that that's.
Yeah, no, I knew that it was an issue with Parker Mills and it seemed
Yeah, I mean, I
ridiculous.
just-
There was,
I mean, we got in it and the state wanted to get as many entities as they could in it. And we thought it would be more than it was, but it's really not.
okay.
And I don't think it's working out for me.
All right. The adaptive reuse of historic structures, aren't there, for example, the Hospital Trust Bank building, schools, there are a couple of, yeah. I would like to see those in here. You know, if we're gonna talk about adaptive reuse, I mean, there's one place right on Main Street, you know, the Hospital Trust building, it's going nowhere.
So just, we can have those in there. I was able to get the council to last year, non-utilization tax allows us to put an additional tax on properties that are being marketed. Last month, we did clean that property and second-story theater in Liberty Street. For a substantial amount of money that's being clean. Again, the town's interest, it's not so much financial, it's make sure that you're.
Right. So, can we add that?
Sure.
Yeah, I'd like to see that in there.
Because they are key properties.
Yeah. The natural hazards and sea level rise, I'm assuming that that's going to be, yeah, that there's clearly the natural hazards element needs to be in there. But are we talking at all about flooding in the historic district?
So a lot of that would be addressed, I mean, there's a separate hazard mitigation section development of the comprehensive plan. Or the final stages of thing that's going to go to the council probably in January. So hazard mitigation, if we're required to do that every 5 years from the state. So we have a hazard mitigation plan and a flood mitigation plans. I think I'd stay away from that a little bit in historic case.
Okay.
But I will suggest that last 2 weeks, there was a really compelling article. About its journal.
And there was
I
someone
think this though.
was in there that whose name is hauntingly familiar.
In this, start homes in like, so. There's a few conditions that you have. That are listed on stilts that.
I don't know that we know enough about that. I mean, so this semester, next semester, I have the students review, right? I'm specifically looking at Water Street and parking and think there's some, I mean, I would like to put a placeholder in that because there are some things that they do in Europe, like, you know, you could just install a series of flood protection. For each drill just have a placeholder in there for that right now. Interesting what some of these kids are thinking about, but there is evidence in Europe that they do with these things. So,
It's quite different, that on one hand, we're talking about Market Street, and Water Street potentially has some of those same
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
absolutely.
issues, and
Yeah.
has a lot more value from a property
Sure,
standpoint.
well, yeah, I mean, they both have value. I mean, it's.
Oh, yeah, I'm not saying it's not, the value there is
I would
significant.
like to put a placeholder there as we get closer to the end, figure out what that language
Okay.
should be.
Under the local historic preservation partners, I'd like to see the Warren Land Trust in there. I mean, why wouldn't they be in there?
They should.
Okay.
Your Garrett was here, something great.
Well, it's interesting when you talk about historic preservation, a lot of times that has to do with the preservation of land and areas that in particular, and given the sea level rise, the protection of that stuff. I don't know who's, and I think they're looking out at that area of the Windmill Hill, the reservoir overlay. They're, I know, have been following that very carefully.
I mean, I think a lot of their, maybe they need to be refocused. They're looking at potential not being big classes. I think, and conservation commission.
Yeah, as one of the preservation partners. Because ultimately, when we get back to that table, that we were talking about earlier, Matt, this is something we could even consider, here's the action steps. This is what, the town needs to do. But this is where some of these groups need to go. I mean, frankly, I look at this group. You got the Warren Heritage Foundation, the Warren Preservation Society, the Charles Whipple Green Museum, the Historic Warren Armory, the Massasoit Historical Association, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 historic preservation operations in the smallest town in the smallest state. I mean, what the hell happened to consolidation? I mean, talk about the 39 cities and towns.
I was gonna say, you start with 39 states.
I mean, yeah, but within this town, and I've talked to some of the leaders of these groups, and they said, "Oh, we've tried to get together." Well, I mean, to me, it would be the job of the comprehensive, the planning board to say, "Hey, pull your stuff together." You're sucking money out of the same pot,
Have you read
essentially.
the white paper for the regionalization? It's fascinating.
But I would like to note that this, yeah, I'd like to note that that this seems to work against itself. You never know. One of these groups has a fundraiser, and it's like, well, do I support that one or not?
They have them on the same night, that's the problem too.
Yeah, that was another.
Which is, I mean, that's not a joke, it happens.
No, I know. I mean, I would like to note that,
Well, I
there
think
is,
too, to the table is that, there are other federal agencies that can help us. We're talking to NCRS in terms of, part of Market Tematica, talking with REMA as part of Market Tematica. So there are other federal agencies that can play a role here that bring money to the table for preservation.
Nature Conservancy, they've been involved in some of the
Yeah.
work in terms of the
Yeah, I mean, it's
remediation.
ongoing. I mean, there's, ongoing conversations with respect to Swansea country.
Yeah, the Nature Conservancy saved the bay. Wendy Ferguson's been involved in the whole, opening up. I'll just let that go. But anyway, I would like to see a consolidation, because that, I mean, I think it's,
It's an alphabet soup right now.
yeah, and the planning board needs to step up and say, if you really are concerned about historic preservation, then you should be working together, not against each other, because that's what it appears to be right now. So, well,
Some of them are just. It would be actually interesting to get a list.
I think that whole business is not working together. Anyway, I think it needs to be stated up front. A lot of good group.
Yes, we give a lot of them money. Just look at it. Just look. If you look at our annual budget, they give us organizations, like there's probably 30. I mean, it's $1,000, it's $5,000. Just do it.
Yeah, and part of the problem there is the perception, you know, if we're looking to, you know, re-emphasize the Warren Historic District, you need those people who are claiming to be historic preservationists solidly behind you. It just lends itself to confusion, to added confusion. Who am I giving money to? What are they doing? And they're all well-meaning people. I mean, I don't mean to, but it's gone on for way too long.
So just because I know we're going to be listening to this conversation, when we get into the really meat of things, economic development, affordable housing, transportation.
Where does the authority reside to call for that consolidation?
Again, it could be a recommendation with it. I mean, and I think it should be. I mean, I say that jokingly, but I mean, I am a proponent of regionalism. I think the Metacom plan speaks to regionalism, specifically with respect to transportation and infrastructure. But you know, that is a conversation that needs to be had. We need to have 3 animal control. So, everything was.
A lot of coyotes.
But with these associations, I mean, they're all like she was saying, not for profits, but some are, but they're individually run. From one,
But there's a lot of cross pollination.
yeah, right. So like, you know, a solution could be, you know, having some commonality in their activities, but they could still maintain some individual identity because they have,
I don't think
you know,
that's-
distinct
you know, they
purposes
need
at
to be
times, you know,
excluded
but-
from that because
Yeah.
the money that we give them, I mean, some of them maybe this simply money they get, but I just think as having a plan that says we're gonna think out of the box, think differently, we need to collectively get together and like be marching in the same direction. You can't have everyone marching in the same direction, playing different views. That's kind of what we have
And
going
there's
on.
a fear that if if they consolidate, pet projects get lost. And at the same time, they're struggling to get their pet projects done. Whereas, if you have a
Right.
focus on it and you said, okay, we're going to take care of the armory. Now we're going to take care of the Methodist church, and we're going to ensure that the houses around those places are, then you'd have a sense of continuity. Because I'll tell you, you start talking about the Historic District Commission. Well, Bob said, the town council didn't understand that it wasn't voluntary. And so that means if the town council hadn't gotten that, then there's a hell of a lot of people out there in Warren who don't have it. And by having those people who represent historic preservation all on the same page, you've got a constituency as opposed to this broken group of, people following their own lines.
Right. So my mindset was like, does it mean that rather than identifying some of the myriad associations out there, by name, when in reality, the plan would be more, we're concerned with making sure that the actual objectives,
Yeah, I
which
think
are
that's
town centric,
I think that's a good point, is the eliminating the names, just talk.
the subject matters, yeah, right.
It's safe, like, funds, town funding will be based on objectives that are in the plan. And so then you don't have to give out 17 checks, you pick the one stations, you your goals.
Yeah,
Right, because say there was like 8 similar types of groups and we mentioned 4 of them, those other 4 are gonna go ballistic, that they're not in the comprehensive plan, it's gonna be this battle, and it's not that we don't agree with them or disagree with them.
Just going back to where the chair was. There's that constituency. Does everyone in town share that constituency? You know, so, yeah, you need to address it more generally as to.
there's the Narragansett, there's the Wampanoags. I mean, I used to teach American Indian history, you know, it's like one group gets the ear of the town, suddenly they're the,
The reference point I have is, again, I'm not an expert on Indian history, but just that there. You know, we know it. And maybe statute, Massasoit, that is depicted as statute in Plymouth Harbor, where Massasoit is depicted as being the leader of the Wampanoags. And Okanogan is the leader of the Okanogan. And all are the same vegetable family, and I don't think that was any disrespect, but what is,
Right,
what do you celebrate?
and then why are we like putting our bet on one team over the other team?
right, so I think they would, in some of those,
Respecting the indigenous people.
yeah,
is-
right.
We all agree that's important.
And then, so like in some of these things where you can address like known nomenclature that, like conservation, like we want to like sort of highlight that that's what our intent is. And so that the people that are involved with that would almost be aware that we're talking about that existing entity more or less, or some future derivation of it or whatever. But you could say conservation or Warren preservation, and you don't have to identify the specific name, but you can say like historic, um, town key museums and facilities,
So
like
this-
the armory and stuff like that.
As we're talking, I think this has been good as a litmus test.
Yeah,
to
yeah.
say, going forward, let's not drill down on this group, this is the boys club, the group. the car
Right,
club.
right.
I mean, let's just talk, generally, this is what we want. I mean, if you're in agreement.
I think so. I mean, some of these groups could go defunct, you know what I mean? Like,
The
we,
Warren Land Conservation Trust was defunct 2 years ago. If the members that are there now move out of town or
Yeah.
die, they'll be defunct too.
they're all small organizations, you know.
And the thing is, though, that kind of citizen voluntary, for the most part, they don't have, executive directors. That's important to getting things done. It's the town can ask for something, but you need that constituency of people. And if they understand the importance of that, like the land trust conservation, we lost a lot of good land because there was a hyper focus on like Belcher Cove, this is going back 20 years or so. But, if we want to protect open space, that what we have left, if that's the case, that should be the focus of the town, and we would welcome, I'm going along with what you're saying,
Yeah,
for
right,
sure,
right,
Tom. If that's the focus of the town, that's where you ought to put your time and effort, because that's what we see as important, not, pet projects all over the place that take away from attention to something really important. I mean, for me, that whole Kickamuet Shad Factory Reservoir is a key element of open space. And if nobody's paying attention to that, or if just the town is, there's a lot of interests out there that would love to develop that land.
Right. And the other benefit is if we have this, clarified that historic preservation, this is local historic preservation partners or whatever, that the town is vested in this sort of spearheading this unified front, then it empowers the town to sort of communicate to these groups that, like, if you do want to continue to receive those checks, you know, there's going to have to be some cooperation, because we're not gonna,
Yeah, and I don't want.
we have a vested interest in moving forward.
Because we've
Right,
specifically said.
yeah, right.
This. I mean, the plan should be, our overall philosophy is we want to preserve the historic downtown.
Right,
And
right.
here's how we're gonna do it.
Exactly,
Without
right.
naming names.
Yeah, exactly, right.
I wouldn't mind seeing local historic land and building, or building and cultural resources preservation partners, because this is a hyper focus on just the historic things. I'd like to see, you know, it broadened. So when we're talking about our cultural resources, because this is land and cultural resources. I mean, a cultural resource is land. I'm assuming we're going to have a separate thing for land.
Yeah, we have land use. Oh,
Right.
absolutely.
But I like cross-pollinating in these things. I mean, the more you can you know, it can be stated in each one of the elements, the stronger it gets.
And I had a meeting, I think it was. Last five minutes, where I invited all this sort of. I. What we want to do.
Yep.
You guys figure out how you do it.
Right, exactly, that makes sense.
Again, I think an appendix with what these people, I mean, these are all mission statements.
Yeah, I think an appendix, the list.
An appendix is.
Right.
That, those that we know as of the date.
So my question is this, then, if we take them out and we meet standard 4 form,
I'm sorry, about.
so this is the state comprehensive plan standards. Standard 4 form.
Yeah, I mean, so again, that's looking at, those are the standards that they have in their comp plan now. I mean, I think they addressing them in an appendix. But I met with state land planning and said, I don't want to do typical comp plan, I want to do affordable plan, which is different. They don't have any standards for that, so we're going to be the test case for that. So, I mean, I think moving that to an appendix is appropriate, because we're still addressing it, but taking the focus off of those individual groups and looking at it more generally in terms of how we're going to do this. I'd rather start there, and if they can push back. The gentleman that oversaw all the comp plans, by the grace of God, retired.
No, I'm in complete agreement, I'm just trying to.
No.
Yeah,
listen,
yeah, no, I hear you.
I think by moving it to the appendix, you can check the box that you're still addressing it. By taking it out of the body of the document, you're not prioritizing some of that minutia that. I can tell you that every community that has an updated comp plan, they got it done, they said, they got it, it's on a shelf right now.
Yeah.
I don't want a plan.
Well, you know, I think if we think of this as a narrative, it's, you know, the comprehensive plans that I've looked at are not narratives, they're broken up. When you look at this, you know, when I hit the so-on section, it was like, whoop, wait a minute, you know, I got to stop for a while and think about it. You know, it's, you want to have this be a story. We're telling a story here about how we think this town can become better, and how we can protect it, preserve it, and move it forward all at the same time. I mean, that's, you know, in the simplest form, I think that's what we're trying to do.
I'm in agreement of moving this to the appendix question on, when I'm on page 4. Strategies, which are things like, these are strategies, would it make sense to have some sort of verbiage that says, as opposed to just a appendix, clients say, one of the strategies for information is partnering with the organizations. On that, one of the strategies is that we think we need to solve, there needs to be some sort of consolidation. So computer, broad into it, so it's just.
I agree.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah,
I mean, time you can talk about being collaborative, is better. But, you know, again, I think the zoning needs to have to come out of that because it's collaboration, zoning is, that is, that's probably, it has to be reworked.
yeah. But again, and I think as Ashley said, if we're establishing a strategy and goals, it's, you know, it's perhaps not as bold-faced as this, but, you know, you're either on the bus or you're off the bus.
But that could be part
The
of
bus is leaving.
But that could be part of the zoning ordinance too, that you're that specific in the zoning. This is why we're doing this.
Right.
Oh, so you're saying that in this, just to clarify, that heading in that passage is like everything's intended to be specific to zoning, right? As opposed to the strategies would be referencing zoning strategies, not just general strategies that we have before. Okay.
Testifying next week for the House has a special local letter of housing. I say this already, it could be my last day. And to blow it up in terms of, like, you can address this through zone and, you know, here's what we're doing and here's how we're addressing this. But, you know, again, my point is every year, we throw billions of dollars at affordable housing. And we come back next year and say, $4 billion. Affordable housing, we're obviously doing something wrong. I want this document to be the not something wrong document. I mean, it's ridiculous.
No, and it's crap too. I mean, comparing Warren to Barrington, and, you know.
But I mean,
the number of
let's
people
get real, let's have an honest conversation. It's not working.
Right. And your parameters for it are ridiculous.
I mean, I can be in a $341,000 house. I do, yeah.
Okay, so, we're in the arts and that was,
Are we supposed to be giving you our comments?
yeah, no, I think, you know, if you've got a comment as we move through it.
Aren't we doing comments now?
Yeah,
Isn't that
yeah.
what we're doing?
Yep. Go ahead.
What I'm noticing is we're moving, I'm holding my comments. I have comments. Sorry, John.
No, I think you can, what are they?
No, I'm just, I mean, this is our test case.
No, I get it. Yeah, no.
I mean, my first comment was, I mean, I'm a huge advocate for it. When I look at the rest of the document, it's no great parts. Sesame Street, not like the others, starts playing, but like,
I had the same
Seems
feel,
inconsistent.
right? I didn't follow necessarily what the.
She may not have done a good job connecting those dots. You're right, this is the beta test before we get too deep into this. You know, how does this, you know, again, markets and Metacom is a cornerstone. These things have to be similar. Pick up on Sesame Street, they agree. There has to be a clear connection for people to understand, oh, this is why they're doing it, or this is what the connection is.
Right, right. I see what you're saying, because like, I mean, the market to Metacom, it, you know, to a certain extent, that's like not very historical. You know what I mean? It's so,
Not
it's,
historical at all.
so, but we want to do the cross pollinating of the various
Right, but
things
with
and then
significance of it.
so you need to, like,
Development for sure.
communicate it, make a
Just-
transition to
Well, I
ties
think,
them
I
together.
think
like you're
what
saying.
would make sense would be
But-
some kind of a statement at the beginning of each of these sections.
Why we're doing it.
Yeah, so that that would tie into an overarching statement that's at the beginning of the comprehensive plan, but would appear here. To answer your question, I mean, you know, you're right. It's like, how do these things fit in? You know, I think we need a statement at the beginning of this section saying preservation of historic and cultural resources is essential to maintaining the character of
I would
Warren.
almost suggest that before you even get into the elements, that the introduction needs to talk about that this was designed for this purpose. We have the development opportunities on our, so we're doing this because preserve the historic, and preserve the address the transportation, all that needs to be, somebody needs to read, if somebody's not gonna read the whole book, they at least need to read the preface.
That first thing.
Get out from.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's just like the title, saying like Market Medical. It just doesn't make sense. Even our time, just kind of makes,
Yeah, it was,
let's take out the head.
But that should be,
Creative
that should be before you get to any elements.
Right,
Right,
yeah,
right.
If you're not gonna read the whole book, please read this.
and that's why I think the Native American part is obviously the things change, and they're not consistent. with the rest.
like, until you get way down to the bottom, way later, it goes back to that, I think.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. And so it
Down at, yeah, at arts and culture, it comes back with that.
comes back, so it's like, oh, it's on. And so, yeah.
But, so, I'm still kind of, working a bit, gonna jump on some stuff. When I look at the current comp plan, it has 1.5 pages, a full page of pros, of like, starts with, as in many small towns, you kind of just.
You can't look, I mean, that was done in 2003. Don't look at the current one. That thing's a business.
Why, I guess my question is, when I look at the current version, it gives me no setup of what the vision is for the historic resources.
It's a normal document. I mean, the problem, this is my frustration, is that.
No, it's the current one.
This one right here.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I agree with that. I mean, it's, you shouldn't even, Market to Medicom should be, you need to understand how this document was created. So Market to Medicom is the focus of this. You read through it, it needs to have a setup and how it relates to all of these elements. So when you get to this historic piece, I mean, it doesn't, first piece is a Market to Medicom, second piece is the film. It's some of the other things we discussed. So the setup has to be different.
Needs to be reordered.
Right, and I mean, and this is why.
Which is what I think you're asking for.
Kind of
you know,
made it
right.
interesting, this because if you're interpreting this to be like any other comp plan, which is useless. I'm sorry, I just.
Well, no, I think,
Not- I'm not saying-
where
I'm not
Matt's
criticizing
going
that.
is, I think we need to pull out stuff like SOAMs, the historic groups. The thing needs to start off, before you have even the goals, maybe, it's a reiteration of the beginning of the comp plan, which is, you know, what are our historic and cultural resources and how do you protect those?
So what I'm thinking is, we're saying here today is, and stepping back and saying, Allison, write the introduction first. Write the introduction on Market Medicom. It's all the elements that are required in the comp plan. Then we'll back into those elements.
Right. Because then,
That needs to be the setup.
right, because then it'll give us the opportunity to go back into this specific element. That's why this one's so crucial, because it's the first one, so we're saying, well, how does this work?
But it wouldn't matter whatever element we had. I mean, the aha moment for me was the card is way before, of course, we need to start at the beginning of the book.
If we're totally kind of scrapping the, is. About a few minutes ago, specifics of conservation societies. Is there a reason we wouldn't take, why do we need to list Birch Hill? Why can't we put all these specifics in appendix, and then this becomes a very slim document that has like historic sections, like one paragraph that talks about the goals. If you want to read about this, go to the appendix,
Could be.
otherwise, we're moving on.
And it could be, I mean, I would prefer that because
I would too.
somebody would actually read that.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, then they'd be able to get the short, concise,
Whatever their
you know,
interest is, they'll go
everything,
there.
you know, in
I
a
mean,
short
I'm
thing
all
without
for
having to go through.
mean, I think this conversation tonight has been, sorry for the story, he sacrificed it. It was good because, I mean, I think we need to like start that people are not gonna read 300 pages of bullshit. They're not going to. You were formed in 1760. How many times are we gonna read that? 8 years.
I mean, actually, the policies on page 8, you know, I think arts and culture, same thing. The Arts and Cultural Commission, the Tax-Free Arts District, Art Night, Bristol Warren, all appendix. If you go to page 8, which is, this is the implementation element. This is where, and as we discussed, where the table kicks in. So page 8 really does what we're asking for. There are some things that I'd say here. You go down through the like implementation actions, expand the current boundary of the Warren Volunteer Historic District. That's not, to me, the top priority of.
No, part of this is Allison understanding work.
Yeah, no, I get it, and that's what I'm saying.
Cable.
Yeah, so I think, you know, we have to, if, I'm not quite sure how we could,
I think going back to the table makes it easier. I mean, like, the art groups, I mean, that's soft stuff. I mean, I don't know that we have a lot of weight on that. I mean, that's all good.
it's good to have, you know, it's like, it's good to have historic.
And it's appendix that's gonna change before it even gets printed. It's like,
I mean, I like the fact that, sure, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, this is how we're gonna do it.
If you're looking for an acronym for that, we call it just one. You know, bluff comp plan, that would be great.
Yeah. I mean, I think
Yeah, it's part of it.
the policies here are really, I mean, that you could build your story out of. You know, those protect and preserve historic and cultural resources through the use of design standards, zoning regulations, and other
I mean,
strategies.
I just want to pull back from all of it. I mean, it's just like, it feels like a big group. It's like, whatever the element is, let's just get specific. Here's why we're doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's 2 or 3 bullet points. We're doing it
And
because
how we're gonna do it.
we need workforce housing. We're gonna do it through zone changes. We're gonna, you know, transportation, we're gonna lean on DOT to do this. I mean, we want a lot of filler in the back.
Yeah, that's where I think appendix is
I
going.
mean, this needs to be an action document.
All right,
These things become like Bibles that, again, nobody reads them. I mean, obviously, from 2003, no one's read this. It's the 17th.
all right, well, you know, given that, back to the drawing board?
I think this was,
No, I'm not saying we're starting all over again, but
no, I think this was a really constructive conversation, for me to refocus Alice.
yeah,
What you need to do is reorganize it.
right, based on what we've
Don't
discussed.
follow the state's recommendations. Why we followed that, so it's exactly what they say, so she essentially like gets a question addressing it. Throw that in.
You got a process comment, because I know you're
Yeah,
gonna get lots of more sections. You can send out as a PDF. It was like,
I can send it to you as a Word.
if you do a Word document, then we can track changes and I can.
I can send it to you. And I might ask Matt, because you mean, you know, you're on kind of the quasi-government contract website. You know, your bluff acronym is appropriate. I might ask that maybe you and I and Allison have a conversation together. And maybe Ashley as well, because not to exclude anyone else, but, you know, I'm looking at people that have been with either economic development organizations or other organizations that it's just get to the chase. We don't have a lot of time to read 500 pages of bullshit. Let's get it.
All right.
Master, you're okay with that?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, I think this was the purpose of this, was to, you know, it's like you heard. We've looked at some of the smaller granular stuff, which led to, we need a more coherent story.
Pleased with how this comes.
Yeah, I am too. Excellent.
Will each of the sections have like table of actions?
They should.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, to me, the key element is, it's in the past comprehensive plan, and, people who did it were well-meaning. I feel like I'm beating up on them. But it was too vague. It would be, and that to me was the biggest problem, because as a planning board, I want to be able to point to this thing and say, wait a minute, no, that doesn't meet the action that we were talking about. And to hold people's feet to the fire. Wait a minute, this zoning ordinance was supposed to be changed. Whose responsibility is that? I mean, we could do that on a quarterly basis as the planning board. Is this stuff being done? Because people love to talk about what they'd like to see happen. But when the rubber hits the road, I've worked in so many volunteer organizations, and it comes down to 2 or 3 people doing the work and a bunch of other people saying, hey, I got a great idea. And I don't want this to be the great idea document. I want it to be the action document. And we all do. It's not, it's not about me.
So Fred, my first initial comment was that at the end of this, we need to build in someone who's responsible for reviewing and reporting to town council, whether or not these things are getting done.
I think that may fall to the planning board.
Well, whoever, but I don't think that was done.
No, it wasn't. No.
Someone has to be reporting on a regular